Alright, y'all, this is the last video I am making. It's for page 53, which is a warm-up for your Unit 4 Quiz 2. So, turn to page 53. If you haven't yet had a little bit of time to work on this warm-up, then pause the video and go ahead and do it now. Alright, and at this point, if you are playing the video, then you must be done working on the warm-up. So, to do this first section, first it helps if you know what A, B, and C are, because that's the first thing they're asking you. And to answer those, you should really know our mnemonic device: red Martians, invade Venus using X-ray guns. Now, red, R is for radio, invade, I is for infrared, U using for ultraviolet, X-ray for X-ray. You have to know what these ones that we didn't give you are, though. I'll point out that some of them, if you're lucky, might be mentioned elsewhere on the quiz, like the guns. G is going to be for gamma, which is down here. So that's one that we kind of give you if you just know what word is supposed to go with each spot. Unfortunately, let's see. Oh, and if you're looking for an M, there is an M down here as well. If you're paying attention, there's microwave is what the M stands for. So that's your A. And the only one that isn't given to you anywhere on the quiz, not even mentioned, the V in Venus, that stands for visible. That's the visible part of the spectrum. And remember that visible light is divided into colors, which is going to come in handy to know later. Our mnemonic for that, Roy G. Biv, like it's a dude's name, Mr. Roy G., his last name is Biv. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. The reason we need to know that is because we're going to get asked about it down here. You also need to know which side is low and high wavelength, low and high frequency, low and high energy. So the wavelength ones are kind of easy. If you look, like this is a long wavelength versus this is a short wavelength. So this is your high wavelength. I'm just going to abbreviate it. This is your low wavelength. You could also say this is high, would be long for wavelength, and low would be short for wavelength. And if you remember that wavelength is inverse with both frequency and energy, then really all you need to know is looking at the picture we show you. Here's your long wavelength, here's your short wavelength, and it's the opposite of frequency and energy. So if this is your high wavelength, that's your low frequency and your low energy. If this is your low wavelength, that's your high frequency and your high energy. Which means when they ask which one has lower energy, now we're able to answer that. Lower energy is going to be the one further left. So gamma versus infrared, the one further left is infrared. That's my lower energy. That's what they're asking about. Higher frequency, that's going to be the one further right. So looking at X-ray, and then it says green light. Remember, green is part of visible. So X-ray is here, green is in here inside of visible. Higher frequency, again, is going to be the one further right. So that's going to end up being X-ray, further right, higher frequency. That's your answer. And then longer wavelength, again, that's going to be on the left side. And again, you can see that in the picture. Radio versus ultraviolet. Ultraviolet, these waves are a lot shorter than the waves over on this radio side, so radio is going to be your longer wavelength. In wave motion, the product of frequency and wavelength is equal to the, well, think about what these words mean. Product, like you're multiplying, right? That's what it's called when you multiply stuff. So the product of frequency and wavelength, something where frequency is times wavelength. We have a formula with that. We talked about our formulas the first time back on page 42. These formulas are also printed on the inside back cover of your book and on the inside front cover of your book. So there are lots of places you can look up these formulas. You don't have to memorize them. We will give you these formulas during the quiz. So you got frequency times wavelength, and they want to know what that is equal to. Well, if you look at your formulas, we have one that uses frequency times wavelength. It's equal to c, which remember was the speed of light. So let's see if we can find number of waves passing a given point in a second. That's actually the definition of frequency. So that's not going to be it, because we're looking for something that equals the speed of light. The distance between successive wave crests, that's the wavelength. That's not going to be it either. Time for one full wave to pass a given point, that's time and speed are not the same thing. That's not going to be it. But oh, this one actually mentions the word speed, so it's going to be this one. 7 of the following, which type of electromagnetic radiation has the longest wavelength? So it's a similar question to what we did up here, but now we've got 4 that we have to compare. Remember, long wavelength is going to be whichever one's furthest left. They're asking about gamma, infrared, yellow, and indigo. Yellow and indigo are both part of visible light. Infrared is further left than even those, so infrared is going to have the longest wavelength. And the type of electromagnetic radiation with the lowest frequency, remember low frequency is also going to be on the left side, so let's see what they've got mentioning here. They say microwaves, radio waves, blue light's part of visible, X-ray, furthest left where lowest frequency is, that's going to be radio. And if they had you comparing all colors, you would need to know Roy G. Biv to figure out which color was furthest left, if all your answer choices were colors. Okay, flip the page, because on page 54 is more warm-up. It's guess boxes. You will have to do math on this quiz. It says calculate the frequency and energy of a photon with a wavelength of 4.77 times 10 to the negative 7th meters. Your answer must have units. Remember, for the G boxes, that's where we write the number that they have given to us. And it should always be a number, a unit, and a variable. So here's our number and unit, 4.77 times 10 to the negative 7th meters. They do name a variable wavelength. So this is wavelength equals 4.77 times 10 to the negative 7th meters. And that's what they've given us for both of these problems. U is for your unknown. So what are they asking for? On this side, they ask us to find frequency, so that's going to be F. We don't know what it is. We need units for frequency. You're going to need to know on the quiz that frequency is measured in hertz. We mentioned this on page 42. You need to know that. I may not tell you that on the quiz. And I'll point out that if your unknown has units of hertz, that means your answer is going to need to be units of hertz. And it's also a frequency. So you pretty much copy this down into your answer box. Except instead of the question mark, we'll eventually write a number here. But you can go ahead and copy that down here now before you forget. Then for the equation, remember we have to pick equations that use both of these letters, lambda and F. So I go look at my 3 equations. This equation has lambda, but it does not have f. This equation has f, but it does not have lambda. This is the only one that has both, so that's the equation I'm going to copy down here. C equals frequency times wavelength. Remember that c, the speed of light, is the same number all the time. Again, you do not have to memorize it. We will give it to you on the quiz. C, you could write it up in your given box. It's 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second, and that's always what you're going to plug in for C. We had written that on our notes too. So instead of writing C, I'm going to substitute in that number, 3.00 times 10 to the 8th. And I don't know frequency, so I can either write a question mark, I can write an X, or I could just leave it as the F that I don't know. And it's going to be times lambda. I do have a number for lambda, so instead of writing this letter, I'm going to plug in this number here that I know for lambda. And if I'm going to solve for F, then I need to isolate the variable. That's how they say it in your math class. Isolate the variable by doing the opposite. So this is F times 4.77 times 10 to the negative 7th. The opposite of multiplying times this number would be dividing by this number. So I'm going to divide. And we end up dividing, as I say in your math class, on both sides. So on one side, it'll sort of cancel it out. On this side, what we're really doing in our calculator is doing this divided by that. So type it in your calculator. 3.00 E8, don't forget the E button for your scientific notation, divided by 4.77 E negative 7. When you type it in your calculator, if you type it correctly, it should look like this and give you that answer. Remember that we round to hundredths place, 2 decimal points. So 6.289, this 9 is going to round that 8 up, and we're going to end up with 6.29. And then check for scientific notation. When your calculator has E14 at the end, that means you need a times 10 with an exponent of 14 as part of your answer as well. Let's look at the other problem. This one, our unknown, they ask us to solve for energy, so that's going to be E equals question mark, and we need units on it. Again, you need to know, I'm not going to tell you for the quiz that energy is measured in joules. That is a thing you just have to know. So we'll put a J here. And again, before you forget, you can go ahead and put that down in your answer box. E equals, leave a space to write your numerical answer, and a J for joules. Write it now, before you forget. That's easier points to get. That's like half a point out of 5 points right there, just for remembering to do that. For our equation, we need one that uses both E and lambda. Looking at our 3 equations, this first equation has lambda, but it does not have E. The second equation has E, but it does not have lambda. The third equation has both, so that's the one I'm going to copy down into my equation box to show my work. And again, H and C, those are the same number all the time, and those are numbers I'm going to give you during the quiz. You could even go back and write them in your given box if you want. They'll be given to you on the quiz. You don't have to memorize them. You just have to know when to use them. So when we come down here, E we don't know, so we can just write a E. You could also write a X if it makes you more comfortable. It equals H, which is a number that will be given to you, 6.63 times 10 to the negative 34, times C, which is a number that will be given to you, 3.00 times 10 to the 8th. For both of these, I'm going to put them in parentheses just so it's easier for me to read. Personally, you don't really need the parentheses, but it's easier for me as an old person to look at it if I put parentheses around them. And those are supposed to be divided by lambda, which, again, we were given a number for. So instead of writing the letter lambda, I'm going to write 4.77 times 10 to the negative 7. And now all we have to do again is put this in your calculator. That times that, divided by that. Stick it in your calculator. 6.63 e negative 34 times 3.00 e 8. And again, the great thing about using the e's is you don't have to type parentheses in your calculator if you're using the e's. Divide by 4.77 e negative 7. And if you have typed it correctly, your final answer should look like this. Again, as always, we round to the hundredths place. So 4.169, that 9's going to round the 6 up. We're going to get 4.17. And again, always check for scientific notation. If there's an e negative 19 at the end here, that means times 10 to the negative 19th needs to be part of my answer. All right, at this time, unless Miss Woodlock tells you otherwise, it's time for your quiz.